Hello, welcome to our webinar today titled Cannabis Restructuring, looking at business restructuring in anticipation of cannabis rescheduling. That's quite a mouthful. What is it we call that? Word salad. My name is Janet Jackim. I'm a partner at the law firm Zuber Lawler, LLP, and I'm also co-chair of the Cannabis Practice Group. Just a short info on us. Zuber Lawler is one of the most selective law firms in the country, and we represent clients throughout the world from 7 offices in the U.S. Our focus is typically on emerging industries and technologies, including cannabis, psychedelics, crypto, and artificial intelligence. And of course, we're providing standard commercial real estate contracts, M&A, intellectual property, and litigation services to those large and small companies. I've focused my law practice on cannabis transactions for the past 10 years, representing multi-state operators, regional operators, and smaller dispensaries, cultivators, producers, and transporters, and then also the service providers to that group. My work both inside and outside of cannabis has included bankruptcies, foreclosures, receiverships that you'll potentially hear about today, the sale of distressed properties and businesses, and restructuring. I'm honored to be the moderator and a panelist today because our good friend Jim Ickes is at the Ohio Senate testifying with respect to hot hemp. We have 2 key executives in the restructuring strategies businesses that are part of our panel today. Gary Broadbent, who is the Chief Restructuring Officer at AppHarvest, and Jesse Hubers, Senior Manager, HBK, CPAs, and Consultants. Panelists, would you please introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Broadbent. As Janet mentioned, I served as the Chief Restructuring Officer of AppHarvest, which was a greenhouse producer of fruits and vegetables that went public via SPAC and then sold off via a Chapter 11 restructuring. I was also, prior to that, General Counsel of Jackim, which is a hemp CBD company. And I now do board work and drop-in Chief Restructuring Officer, Chief Legal Officer work for companies that are in a turnaround posture, facing refinancing situations and other challenges. Jesse?
I'm a senior manager at HBK, CPAs and Consultants, and the tax leader of our Cannabis Solutions group. We are a top 50 CPA firm and one of the first kind of major CPA firms to get into the cannabis space. We do tax compliance and tax consulting. That's where I focus my practice. And then we also have a large audit group that does audits of cannabis companies as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Well, getting started, I think we should talk just briefly about what's happened recently with respect to rescheduling. And then I'll be asking Gary and Jesse to talk about what the heck restructuring is. So, rescheduling. In October 2022, the then president, I guess he's still president, President Biden, directed his cabinet to expeditiously review how marijuana would be scheduled under the Controlled Substances Act. And then in April of this year, the U.S. Attorney General sent a shockwave through our cannabis industry when he circulated a proposal to shift marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug under the Controlled Substances Act. For reference, just keep in mind, other Schedule I drugs include heroin and LSD. A Schedule I drug classification under the Controlled Substances Act means that the drug has no documented medical use, and there's a very high chance that the person will abuse the drug. In contrast, a Schedule III drug includes something like testosterone, estrogen, ketamine, anabolic steroids, and Tylenol with codeine. If implemented, rescheduling cannabis to a Schedule III, would make medical use, especially medical research, readily available, and certain tax rules that weigh heavily today upon cannabis companies would no longer apply. This is the 280E rule of the US tax code, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. On May 21st of this year, the DEA issued a formal notice of proposed rulemaking to reschedule cannabis to Schedule III. If you'll recall, over the summer, approximately 90,000 public comments were registered with the DEA, reportedly with 90% of those comments supporting rescheduling or descheduling cannabis. An administrative hearing was scheduled for this early December, just a month away. The date has now been pushed back to January or February, and maybe even later. Typically, an ALJ will hold a hearing to take testimony and consider recommendations. That itself could take months to years, and it may be months to years before we see a clear picture of what rescheduling does and doesn't do. Well, what's next on rescheduling? Our panelists are going to give us their own opinions on rescheduling, and particularly how rescheduling could impact your company's financials, both positively and negatively, and what you can do to prepare for that change in advance of the change. So we're here to talk about business restructuring in light of the anticipated change in rescheduling. So let's take a few minutes to familiarize ourselves with restructuring. Gary, you're the expert in this particular area. Can you start, please, with your definition of restructuring? What is it, and why is it important to those in attendance?
Yeah, of course, Janet. So at a high level, when companies need restructuring, it basically means that they can't meet debt obligations, payment obligations as they become due. That's when a company is in distress. Now, the need for restructuring often comes before that true moment of distress hits. It's looking out into the future, seeing the cash flows of the company, and making that determination that there may come a time when cash is tight or when payments come due and they can't be made. And in that type of a situation, it's best to get as far ahead of it as possible. That old ounce of prevention saying, by having a clear-eyed view of what the performance of the company is going to be, having a clear-eyed view of what the future holds in terms of the business operations and cash flows, can expand the options the company has in terms of restructuring itself and ensuring that it can meet those obligations as they come due.
Jesse, do you want to add any flavor to those comments?
Yeah, I think, as a tax advisor, when I think of restructuring, I'd kind of add to what Gary said. Generally, we try not to let the tail wag the dog, so to speak, when we're trying to plan for taxes. But in the cannabis industry, we kind of have an outlier from that norm. just because the Section 280E, the impact of that on taxes is so big that sometimes that tail is huge, right? So it does wag the dog in some cases. So from our perspective, when we're thinking about rescheduling, it's about what is our entity selection, and in some cases, how are we stacking different types of entities to achieve the tax outcomes that all of the investors are looking for, as well as mitigating a lot of the negative tax implications of things like 280.
Well, I hate to ask this question so early, but can you give us your suggestions on entity organizational charts and which of the entities that are offered is best?
Yeah, so that's kind of a loaded question. I'd say there's not one that's best. There might be one that's best for you, but not best generally. So, right now, I think we're certainly seeing a lot of folks favor C corporations for a variety of reasons. Cannabis companies, to deal with Section 280E, are taking a lot more aggressive tax positions than other industries. And so, a C corporation will kind of shield the investors from a lot of the liability that might come from a subsequent audit. Whereas if you have a partnership, the partnership gets audited, and even if you're in the new partnership audit rules where the partnership can pay the liability, if it doesn't have the funds, the IRS is going to go against the partners themselves. So when you have a wide pool of investors, those aggressive tax positions are affecting a lot more than the company. It's affecting a whole wide range of folks that might not even be aware that they're exposed to this risk. So, a C corporation has been, a preference for that reason. And then also, when we got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017, they had a corresponding deduction, the QBI deduction for pass-through entities, which was supposed to kind of level the playing field. The problem is that cannabis industry, folks don't get to use QBI deduction in the same way that everybody else does. Not because they can't take the QBI deduction, but because there's a cap on the deduction that's largely based on W-2 wages. And you only get to count those wages if those wages are deductible. So if you've got something like a retailer where almost none of those wages can be recovered through cost of goods sold, and therefore they're all non-deductible, that QBI deduction caps out, and you're losing on that benefit that was supposed to put you on the same playing field. So that the C corporation, you get to take advantage of that 21% rate. One other thing why folks are using it that's not really cannabis specific, but it's more kind of growth industry specific, is the qualified small business stock exemption. So, a lot of businesses, it could be more than 10 million. It's the greater of 10 million or 10 times adjusted basis. There's an exclusion of gain when you exit an investment in qualified small business stock if you've met the required holding period. And so a lot of folks are taking advantage of that just because it's such a high growth industry, and that's been a lot very valuable to a lot of investors. The problem with that is that it only works for retailers because it's one of the few times in the tax code that they give farmers the shaft. So if you've got a cultivation entity, there's a farming exclusion that you don't get to use qualified small business stock. So a lot of reason folks are using C corporations. We may see that change, but with the incoming administration, it looks like more cuts to tax rates for C corporations are on the horizon. So all of these cannabis companies that have found themselves in a C corporation, for other reasons, may choose to stay there, just because of the happenstance of a new administration coming in.
When do you think we will have some formality to those new changes in the tax code?
I think it might take some time, right? Because there's this idea of, well, the code itself is not changing, right? So if we have rescheduling, then 280E just on its face will not apply. But there's a lot of open questions as to if it happens mid-year, facially you're still trafficking in a Schedule 1 substance all the way until that, rescheduling date. It's unclear whether the IRS or the Treasury on their own have the power to, extend relief throughout the rest of the year. And even if they don't, there's a lot of folks out there that have arguments that the rescheduling itself, is retroactive based on advisory memo from the Office of Legal Counsel, that said that the DEA applied an incorrect test, and the test that the Health and Human Services came up with was more appropriate. So, in that case, whether it's under that argument or this other argument having to do with the Commerce Clause that's also outstanding, whether any of those bring the retroactive relief kind of to fruition for taxpayers, I think it's going to be a long time till we know the answer to that question. I'm not super optimistic about it, but I think there's certainly a material likelihood that could come to fruition. So we'll see.
So Gary, I think since we've jumped ahead to these permutations on and discussions of 280E, I think we should take a step back and talk about the basics of what a company should be doing to understand or better understand its financial health and determine whether any kind of restructuring should happen. What do you look for? Are there indicators that go bing, bing, bing? This is a problem. We need to be talking restructuring.
Yeah, typically, Janet, you look at the 13 weeks that lie ahead, the 13-week cash flow of the company. Over that 3-month period, you can get a pretty good feel for what direction the company is moving in. Obviously, there's seasonality, there's other factors that play into that, but by looking at that near-term period, you can see whether or not you're going to be able to pay your bills. Once you have a feel for that, you expand the scope of the view and look out a year ahead, 2 years ahead, 5 years ahead. And as the time horizon moves out, your level of uncertainty and how accurate the numbers are going to be, that uncertainty goes up. But typically, when there's a cash problem, it's something the company feels acutely, and it's something that within 13 weeks you should have a feel for what's coming. And the sooner you have a clear-eyed view of where we're at, the sooner you can open the playbook and engage professionals and ensure that you're ready to execute a strategy and weather the storm.
I understand that some companies in cannabis are looking again at their material contracts in today's environment, particularly since the price of flower may be way down, costs of and expenses, particularly employee salaries and wages are going up. What kind of tools exist for these companies who may be in trouble, but may not be in trouble, but just want to take a smart step before too long to take advantage of various contracts and get some benefits, some savings? What tools are there?
Once the scheduling change happens, there's going to be a whole set of new tools that are available to cannabis producers. Right now, it's a more limited state-based group of options where you can abandon the company to its creditors. You can do kind of an out-of-court negotiation with vendors to reduce their fees or to pay them over time. Once we're no longer a Schedule 1 substance, it'll open up the Chapter 11 playbook where you can basically de-lever the company through an in-court process. You can get releases for directors and officers. You can ensure that no one is personally liable for the unpaid bills of the company. And that will be kind of a new day for the industry in terms of its ability to bargain with creditors and to find firmer financial footing.
I understand that some are renegotiating their contracts, i.e., talking to their landlords and complaining about the cost of doing business. Have you ever been involved in that kind of tool? And what's the probability of success?
Yeah, I think it's a higher probability of success when you have the hammer of Chapter 11 as an option. In terms of finding a commercial resolution to cash flow problems, that is something that usually takes more time. And it depends a lot on from situation to situation. But Janet, you're absolutely right that talking to landlords, talking to your suppliers, getting terms, getting discounts, those are all levers and pulleys that are available to us. Those just typically take time and take some hand holding to get them there.
And what about the other side? What about pursuing collections of debts due? I understand there's a lot of that going on as well.
There is a lot of that going on. If you are a supplier to a cannabis company, if you're a landlord to a cannabis company, having the Chapter 11 process turned off is actually an advantage to you, because it's less likely that that the company will be able to use the code as a shield to protect it from claims of creditors. So the leverage is with you right now.
Good. Jesse, I know this is not directly on topic, but we have all been hearing about how a number of the multi-state operators, MSOs, have been filing amended tax returns and claiming huge refunds due. Tell us about that as a potential source of cash to needy cannabis companies.
Yeah, so it's actually gone far beyond the MSOs at this point. We're doing it with quite regular. We're doing it quite regularly with some of our larger non-publicly traded clients and even single state operators. And so basically there are a couple arguments out there that 280E is either unconstitutional on its face or unconstitutional as applied to an interstate operator, or I'm sorry, an intrastate operator rather. And so basically we have this process in the tax code where you can challenge the law and take a position that's contrary to what the code says or what a regulation says. If you file this form 8275 or 8275R in the case of a law where there might be a contrary regulation. And so if you've got a taxpayer who's engaged an attorney to take a look at their specific fact pattern to see if any of these arguments apply to them, and gets an opinion letter that reaches a reasonable basis that they would be successful if challenged by the IRS, then we're willing to file a tax return for them, assuming that they make adequate disclosures. And these disclosures protect both them and us as their tax preparer. So if they, do get selected for audit and they lose and don't choose to pursue it, or they lose, pursue it, and then lose in court, the worst that can happen is they have to pay the taxes due and interest on that balance. But the disclosure of the position prevents them from being assessed accuracy-related penalties, which can be as high as 30% is really the government stick to prevent folks from doing this. So certainly a good option if you've got the money to finance getting an attorney involved to undertake an opinion letter like this. It's certainly not an inexpensive endeavor, but with the tax dollars at stake, a lot of folks are doing this, and it's I think preferable to some of the kind of nonsense, overcomplicated tax structures people have done in the past to achieve kind of nominal tax gains, which are, I think Gen Z would call them sus. I think that's the word now. So, but yeah, no, I think we're seeing a lot less of people kind of playing games with all kinds of entities and fake management companies and stuff like that, and more people just taking a straightforward approach that 280E doesn't apply to them, or it's unconstitutional facially, and taking the risk. Most folks, I would say, you made a comment about claiming refunds on amended tax returns. To my knowledge, TrueLeave is the only one that's actually gotten cash from that. I've heard of other taxpayers who've applied for credits to carry forward to their future tax returns, which is I guess tantamount to a refund. But as far as like getting a cash deposit into your bank account, TrueLeave, to my knowledge, is the only one who's got that. So our approach has been to apply all of these forward as credits, to future tax returns, and we haven't got far enough in this process to see what kind of outcome there's going to be. So I certainly don't make any representations that you're not going to get audited or you're going to be successful. I think it's a waiting game at this point.
Do those companies need to hold the taxes that they're not paying in trust? Do they have to be segregated from the revenues, the typical revenues of the cannabis company?
If you're asking if they're required to be, the answer is no. It certainly sounds like a good idea, and I'd certainly have in mind how you plan to pay these taxes if if they ultimately come due. But there's no requirement other than if you're a C corporation and you think you're not going to pay all these taxes and you're going to distribute the money as dividends. You certainly might be opening up your shareholders to, potential claims by the federal government. If you're, opening the door for them to pierce the corporate veil, so to speak.
Ah, okay. Gary, I think we're assuming that many cannabis companies do have considerable debt on their books, and based on your experience in restructuring in other industries, how should cannabis companies approach debt restructuring if there's rescheduling? Will there be a debt restructuring market of lenders willing to take out debt, pay off debt, and substitute their own debt facilities? Is that happening today? How do our attendees attract a new debt provider?
Yeah, I think that rescheduling will open up a pool of new lenders. Right now, the industry only has a relatively small number of bankers, creditors that are willing to extend credit to it. I think as the taboo and the scheduling issues fall off, you're going to have more established traditional lenders that are willing to enter the credit market for these companies, and that should bring rates down. Obviously, we don't know what the Fed is going to do in the near term, but as additional creditors are willing to lend to the cannabis market, rates should go down, refinancing opportunities should open up, and some leverage should be handed back to those companies.
Jesse, do you want to add anything, or shall we get to the next question directed to you?
Yeah, well, one more comment on this. I think as far as debt opening up, I agree that, as we get rescheduling, I think a lot more lenders are going to be, interested in coming into the marketplace. A huge industry here with, a lot of cash on their hand, or a lot of cash needs. I don't know how quick that's going to be, but what I think is going to happen very quickly is that, the value of equity is going to overcorrect and then come back out into maybe a more fair area. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for, folks seeking debt investment, but also for people, seeking equity investments, and probably at an unwarranted premium, right at the outset. So that might be a good opportunity for kind of savvy operators to take advantage of that as well.
Jesse, as a financial advisor, what advice would you give a cannabis company that wants to optimize its balance sheet so that it can invest in those opportunities as they arise if and when there's rescheduling?
Yeah, so I guess kind of following up on that debt versus equity, conversation, on the balance sheet. Even I think rates will come down, although I have seen a lot of cannabis operators that own real estate get interest rates that are kind of on par with, just other folks in other industries. But for those folks that don't have real estate, they are paying a lot higher interest rate than their, non-cannabis counterparts. I think that will come down, but it's just high generally right now. So, I think as we get rescheduling and there's a lot of opportunities to invest in kind of like a reshuffling of the playing field, it's a good opportunity to invest in marketing, and invest in, uh, being being kind of like a top shelf operator at this point. So if you've got a big, a debt service obligation that's kind of limiting your budget and your ability to reinvest in your company, it seems like an equity kind of focused balance sheet might be a good idea for the near term if we do have rescheduling.
Gary, you want to comment on that?
I think Jesse's spot on there. I think that, and I think having the structures in place now so that you can turn on an equity raise is something to get ahead of, because once rescheduling occurs, once there's kind of a gold rush back into the industry, you want to have something off the shelf where you can take advantage and be opportunistic.
Speaking of that opportunism, it looks to me like there's going to be quite a bit of disruption, as always happens when something new is on the horizon. How quickly are you guesstimating this will become effective, rescheduling? And frankly, the answer, and frankly, the answer is a function, I think, of restructuring, maybe doing some restructuring now in anticipation of rescheduling. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, was this question, who is this directed at? I don't want to.
It does. You're both of you.
Okay.
This is a jump ball. Go for it, Jess.
Yeah, no, I think restructuring ahead of rescheduling. I think it certainly makes sense to prepare for a world where, 280E isn't in the picture. As far as when that might be, I don't know if it's this year or the next year, or 2 years from now, but it certainly feels imminent, right? And so I feel like, when we're making business decisions as big as this, things like entity choice, taking on large investments for the next, 5 years or so, we want to plan for, what it's going to look like in the next couple of years, not what it's going to look like in the next 6 to 12 months. So even if we don't get rescheduling right away, I still am advising my clients to unwind some of these, like I alluded to, these useless management companies that are set up, all these different things that they've done to complicate their situation so that they can contrive some sort of tax benefit to mitigate 280E. I think it certainly makes sense to get ahead of some of those things and undo them to, make your entity a clean entity that's, a lot easier to, sell to investors who you're trying to get investment from, and just kind of have a clean slate ahead of you. I think it's certainly a good idea to try to clean a lot of that stuff up. As far as getting out of C corporation, I've heard a lot of talk about people saying that they want to get out of C corporations. I don't see that happening so much. I think the tax cost is going to be too high to convert to pass-through entity. And then also, like I alluded to before, I've heard rates floated as low as 15% for entities that make their product in the United States under the new administration. So I'd certainly want to wait and see what happens with that before we start talking about exiting a C corporation.
Gary, did you want to add? I know I interrupted you.
No, Jesse handled it beautifully. I think it's one of those situations where we know over the long term rescheduling is bound to happen, but in terms of when, we just don't know. And so you can't plan your business around what action the government's going to take because it's so unpredictable. You just have to focus on cash flow, simplifying your capital structure, ensuring that that you have an investable entity, one that is going to generate cash, one that's going to grab market share, one that's going to be able to weather whatever storms come its way. Negotiating costs with suppliers, ensuring that your inputs are under control, not overhiring, making sure you have a headcount that makes sense. Those are the basic building blocks that are going to help your company be successful no matter what the government does.
Gentlemen, are you hearing suggestions or strategies being developed by your clients on what they're going to do with all that money they don't have to pay tax on, or all those taxes that are going to go away? What are they going to do? Any ideas?
Most of them still owe taxes from prior years, so hopefully they'll just pay those. Yeah, I can't imagine people are going to have trouble spending the money. But I haven't heard too much of that problem.
Are you thinking we're going to have more consolidation going on, use of that money or the allocation to go toward purchasing other cannabis companies, buying cultivation properties, new equipment, and so forth, I would assume?
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe that's where this kind of like structuring question comes more into play. Not so much as undoing what you've already done, except, some of that kind of useless stuff that I alluded to earlier, but like, what are we going to do going forward, right? So even if you're, a C corporation, if you're selling your business, it's probably going to be an asset deal so the new person can decide, how they're going to want to be set up going forward. But if you're a C corporation, you're acquiring somebody else, maybe you use, partnerships in conjunction with your C corporation or joint ventures or something like that to kind of let this new money come in, still have the benefit of partnership taxation that they might be looking for, pass through losses and stuff like that without unwinding what you've, currently have set up. So I certainly think there's room for those conversations, even if we're, might be stuck with what we've already done from a, entity selection standpoint.
Gary, how quickly do you think we should be reacting with respect to rescheduling when it happens? Do you have any inclination as to how a company can respond effectively if there's rescheduling? What is it going to do?
I think, Janet, is going to open the floodgates of investment. That is going to make this industry hotter than it's ever been. So I think Jesse alluded to this earlier, but laying those foundational pieces to make your company an investable vehicle, to make sure that you have the opportunity to raise capital or refinance your debt. If you put those building blocks in place now, you'll be able to pounce when opportunity knocks.
Would you recommend that executives or founders of companies, cannabis companies, start searching for new investors, new creditors, lenders, now? Or is it really too early to capitalize upon what you think is going to be the boom?
I don't know about you, Jess, but I think it's never too early. It's always good to be having those dialogues. It's always good to have someone willing to pick up the phone, and the more in order your house is, the more investable you'll be.
Would you go the next step of submitting financials, your business plan, strategic plan, any of that now, just to get it in front of informed eyes? Or is it too early?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like most of the successful operators that I've worked with are always looking for money, right? So, as far as seeking investment, I think I certainly wouldn't want to wait, right? Because if you've got an opportunity ahead of you, if you don't take advantage of it, somebody else will. But as far as if we're talking about valuation and something where we might be looking at a valuation today as opposed to after rescheduling, maybe that's the time to get a clever lawyer involved to write some, provisions in the purchase agreement that maybe can take into account future rescheduling and the impact that might have on value. So I certainly think there might be a little bit of risk in taking on equity investment now, right before a potential rescheduling where you might have a much higher premium on that equity. But I certainly wouldn't let that stop a company from looking for investment. Maybe a good opportunity to take on some short-term debt with the idea of maybe converting later.
Gary?
It's like anything else, Janet. It's better to have a conversation that's already warm rather than just calling out of the blue and having something cold. So I would have NDAs in place and make sure that your information and your plans are protected. But I would certainly continue the dialogue, continue raising the money, and highlighting the opportunity that your company brings.
I'm wondering if you have an opinion on what a rescheduling will look like. And by that, I mean, will it be a medical marijuana program at the federal level only, superseding, overriding all of those state laws that took so long, those programs at the state level that took so long and cost so much money to develop and implement? What are you thinking?
I think it's a fantastic question because if we've got a federal marketplace, these states are going to be protecting their programs because they've invested so much into these programs, and California will run everybody out of business. It's going to be really interesting, to see what happens. I personally am really interested to see what, the FDA's role is going to be in all of this. I think that there is a lot of unanswered questions that nobody has the answer to. But what I do think is, if the government is going to do something like rescheduling cannabis, I don't think that they are going to be incentivized to turn the whole industry on its head and wreck industries in certain states all around the country. They're doing this because they, either out of the goodness of their hearts, or they see a political incentive to, to assisting this industry. And if that's the incentive that they're operating on, they're going to also try to protect their interests in operations in their states. So I see the government figuring out how to deal with it, but I have no idea what that's going to be.
I have some ideas, and each time I pick this question up, I come to different conclusions, and certainly looking at different steps and, well, what if, and I never really get answers. And I suspect it's just we're too early in this process. I can't figure out, though, as you said, how FDA gets involved. If you look at the other Schedule 3 substance, they're all prescribed by registered physicians, right? You need Tylenol with codeine, you go to a doctor and the doctor writes a script, and you go to the pharmacy and you get it filled. Does that mean that's the arrangement that the medical component of our business is going to have to comply with? Further, I'm wondering if Schedule 3 drugs are of that nature, then do they have to be tested? Every marijuana product that's going to be sold to a medical patient would have to go through rigorous testing. Does every operator who owns a product and wants to sell it have to have the product tested and those testing results submitted to the FDA for approval? I mean, now we're talking about two totally separate industries being impacted. Maybe a dispensary, which typically sells both medical and adult use, will have to split. And all operations relative to medical maybe are housed in one facility with a pharmacist and a doctor, and the other, adult use, will typically be tested under state laws, but wouldn't have to go through the rigors of what is applied today to other Schedule 3 substances. What do you think?
Well, I'd love to know.
Okay. Yeah, tell us, Gary.
Janet, it would be great to see this it's treated more like alcohol, where obviously alcohol is not a controlled substance. It's under ATF regulations. Seeing cannabis in a place where it's age restricted and there is testing, but not pharmaceutical type testing, I think would be the most workable. Whether or not the government takes that path, I don't know. Anyone
from the chat group or attendees want to take a stab at that one? All I know is that the cannabis industry is a great proponent of capitalism at its best, entrepreneurship at its best, and compliance issues are sometimes swept under the rug because there's no guidance. There's limited guidance. And I recall the days early in the movement where, it was make it up as you go. And I hate to admit that, but that's sometimes where cannabis has put us practitioners and experts like you all. I am hopeful, however, that our government will get its act together and get us quick regulations and help us understand the whys and wherefores relative to rescheduling cannabis. And in the meantime, I call to your attention, everyone, on this webinar, that these two experts obviously are in your corner. And if you do need assistance, please call them, email them, and get some answers before you undertake a restructuring, or you're forced into the corner and you need to declare a receivership or just close your doors. These are good people that you want to talk to. I don't have any further questions, but if you'd like to add your comments, your closing comments, I'm sure we'd appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. So, I think the biggest things are, where do you want to go and how do you want to get there? That's the first question you need to ask as far as like tax planning before you even start considering tax. Tax is important, but the biggest thing should be like, what are the goals of your organization? And so once you determine that, it's as easy as, coming up with different options on how to make that happen, from a legal perspective, and what are the tax consequences of doing it each way. And then we, do pros and cons and make a decision, and an uneducated decision, hopefully. So I would say that we've, been in this world where, as I said earlier, the tail's kind of wagging the dog a little bit more than it's used to. I would say, do our best to kind of put that aside and let tax take more of a backseat in this industry, like it is with most industries, and certainly let it, let your tax advisors help you to kind of marginally, better your tax outcome after the fact.
But you don't mean you want to put the tax people into the dark corners?
No, not in the dark corners. Right alongside your M&A folks and your other folks. Just just letting it not be the most important conversation you're having.
Gary, would you like to add a few?
Just to reiterate what you already said, Janet, it's don't be afraid to reach out for help. There's tax professionals, financial professionals, legal professionals who are ready to step in and fight alongside of you, whether it's renegotiating contracts, whether it's refinancing your debt, whether it's raising equity, whether it's buying a company. It makes a difference who you have by your side. And the Janet and Jesse are two wonderful people to work with.
Thank you. I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors today, Zuber, Lawler, AppHarvest, and HBK CPAs and consultants for letting their phenomenal cannabis leaders, Jesse and Gary, spend time with us today. Thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you for attending this webinar. We hope to see you soon.